Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another rapid fire review here on the channel. This is where I try and review a new release within 24 hours of reading it. Today is the 25th of October and yesterday I finished Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a new release from Orbit Books here in the UK. It did come out in the US in April of 2022, so we're a little bit behind the times. So if this looks familiar to you, that's why. In the UK, this came out on the 27th of October. I say came out because I don't think I'm gonna get this video out on release date. I would love to. I would really love to get this out on Thursday, but realistically, I don't think that's happening. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I was sent a free copy of this book from the publisher for review, regardless of where books come from. Nobody's paying me to talk about books and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. If you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, click away now. And lastly, I will link the story graph below in case you want to check out any content warnings. I read this after Angela had read it, quite a few months after Angela had read it, in fact. I'll link Angela's review below in case you want to check that out. So I went in with fairly high expectations because I knew Angela had loved it and I was pretty sure I was going to as well. I don't really know why, given that I've spent most of this year saying that mythology or retellings of sorts where it's focused on the women tend to be very miserable and I don't always love that. But I've had a few wins with them this year, so maybe that's why. This is a reimagining of the life of one of the characters from the Indian epic, the Ramayana. So I'm wary of trying to call it like a mythology retelling because obviously it's in some ways history, so it's a little bit complicated, the language around it, but regardless, we're talking about one of the characters from that. I didn't know the Ramayana before I picked this up. I'd never encountered it other than in, I think, probably primary school, because Catholic secondary school, they don't really teach you about other religions in any way, shape or form. So my education there is somewhat lacking. However, I did look it up after the fact to kind of get a sense of where Kaikeyi fits within that and what elements of the story were being adjusted in order to tell her story in a different way. So in the original Ramayana, Kaikeyi, one of the interpretations of it is she comes off as kind of like the wicked stepmother who sends Prince Rama away. In this, Vaishnavi Patel examines that and sort of says, okay, but was she? Because let's look at the language. She's being described in a particular way. In fact, let me find her quote. On one such occasion, where her grandmother is telling her the story, my mother overheard my grandmother telling of how Rama was exiled by his wicked, jealous stepmother and how she stepped in with a different interpretation. From her perspective, the Ramayana couldn't have happened without the stepmother, so how evil could she truly be? This minor disagreement lodged in my brain. I thought about it for years, periodically hoping someone would write the stepmother's story, Kaikeyi's story. Eventually, I decided to write it myself. The more I researched the Ramayana, the more fascinated I became. In most versions of the epic, Kaikeyi is described as a courageous warrior and excellent queen, a woman who loves Rama as her own son. Slowly, Kaikeyi became not just about the event which made her infamous, her choice to exile Rama, but about exploring the full and rich life she led before tearing her family apart. In order to do her justice, I also delved into the stories of the other women who populate the edges of the Ramayana, seeking to give voice to their inner lives. So while this isn't a direct retelling of the Ramayana, it is drawing on that and trying to flesh out bits of that story. We've seen it done in other things. Again, she talks in an interview in the back of the book about how obviously the book's being compared to things like Song of Achilles, where we're rewriting those characters, and Circe as well is another great example. Her point there is that it is very different because in some ways this is history rather than being a mythology retelling, but I do think it draws on some of those similar ideas of giving voices and different interpretations to these characters who historically, or I can't think of the right word for folklorically, I don't think that's the right one, have been given this one interpretation. In some ways doing something slightly different, in some ways doing things very similarly. Please put more author interviews in the back of your books. I really found it interesting to read. I thought it was really enjoyable. I would like more of that, please. I think having now looked at the story, I think you would have, well, I know you would have a different experience because everyone has a different experience, but I think you would have more of a different experience going into this knowing the Ramayana very well. I think it would be similar to things like Circe, where we have this very one-sided view of a character and getting to see another side of it is a different perspective on something you already know. If you don't already know it, however, I still think this is a really good story and a really good book, and it didn't feel super duper miserable, although I think it could have done. I think there was a very easy way to interpret the story. I think there was a route this story could have taken where it became very like, things are terrible for women, men are terrible to women, let's go. Whereas this felt much more hopeful and much more like an interesting examination of the story. I think it helps that it's not pinning other characters necessarily as antagonistic who aren't antagonistic in the Ramayana. So it doesn't feel like, oh, I have been misjudged and everyone else is terrible. It's more, I have been misjudged within the scope of this wider story, which I think is a really fascinating way of re-examining this character. And it's told as Kaikeyi looking back on the events of the book. So there's also a lot of good, in hindsight I can see this, or people often say this about me, but actually this happened, which I think helped with the fact that I don't know the story particularly well, because it could say things like, people said that I favoured my son, but actually that was not true. So I can go, okay, that's the main interpretation, this bit is the reimagining. But I was talking about the main story. Kaikeyi in the beginning of the book, her mother is exiled and she doesn't really know why. She gets married off, and it's sort of, in some ways, kind of slice of life elements of the story. Very high energy slice of life, very high action slice of life, but slice of life nonetheless. Like, if you asked me to tell you the main plot of the book, I don't know that I'd be able to do that without just telling you every single thing that happens, because everything leads into the next thing in a really satisfying way, and in a way that I think is probably reminiscent of that epic style. There is magic within this story. There's the idea of being god-touched. Kaikeyi in particular can access the binding plane, which is where she can see her bonds with other people and in some ways influence those bonds. And it's a little bit risky and a little bit complicated, but it's very interesting the way that has impact on her relationships with other characters, and some of that knowing who you can trust explicitly comes through in the story, which is, I thought, was very interesting, and makes it all the more interesting when relationships break down and when relationships are forced to break down. I think that added a really engaging element to the story. And while it's not a fully magical hard magic system with explicit rules, which you know I love, I still found it very engaging and interesting and all that stuff. I think it took me a little while to get into this book, which I know I say in a lot of book reviews, and I think it's just a quirk of my character is that the beginnings of books are not my favourite parts of books, the ends are. I think that because of that slice of life aspect, it takes a little while to get going, and it takes a little while for you as a reader to go, oh, okay, this plot is happening. Because I kind of got towards the last 20% of the book and I was like, I don't feel like I've hit the peak of the story, but it's because the story is more gentle than that, and it's not as action-packed. And I think it helps that this is a standalone, so we're not building to a big cliffhanger ending or anything. It's just taking you on a journey with this character and explaining some things about it. I think that probably helps if you know how things end and you understand where the story is going, like I did for Ithaca, for example. But for me, when I was initially reading it, it did feel like a little bit of a slow start. Other things you might want to read, I already mentioned Circe, I already mentioned Ithaca. All of my reference points for this are Greek mythology, which is a little bit unhelpful because what I want to do is say, like, here's all these other stories based on Indian epic. I don't have those for you. The other Indian-inspired story that I've loved recently has been the... oh, what's it called? The Burning Kingdoms duology by Tasha Suri. I'm just going to double check that's what it's called. Look at me remembering what things are called. I've really enjoyed that. I think it's a good book. Very different from this in a lot of ways, but in some ways, women taking power, there's an element in there, I think. I'm also next month rereading The Tiger at Midnight by Swati Tidala and following it on with the sequel, The Archer at Dawn, which is also Indian-inspired, so I don't know whether that will have anything in it that I want to mentioned, so I thought I'd mention it now because otherwise I'll end up editing things in later and that doesn't make any sense. But yes, that's another one. And also The Library of Fates by Eddie T. Khorana I read many years ago and really enjoyed. So if you have any other Indian-inspired fantasy recommendations, or indeed sci-fi recommendations, speculative recommendations, please do give them to me now because I would love to read more. And if you also have a recommendation of a translation or an adaptation of the Ramayana, I would love to read that as well, because I would like to read the actual full thing rather than just cherry-picking from articles in various places and YouTube videos. Overall, should you read Kaikeyi? The answer is yes. Yes, you should. It's a really good book. If you are a little bit like me and you are a bit burned out on this kind of character from history/fiction, but now we've retold her story, but she's miserable, I think this challenges that somewhat. This felt more triumphant to me. It felt more interesting to me. I don't know whether that's because it wasn't Greek mythology or what, but I had a good time. I think it'll fit the bill for people who still really like that subgenre and for people like me who are feeling a little bit weary of it. It's different enough. Have you read this already? Do you have plans to? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It genuinely does make me feel loved and appreciated. Nothing makes me feel more loved and appreciated than my patrons over on Patreon who support the channel and get early access to videos and bonus content if you would like to join their number. That's linked down below, as is my Twitter and my Discord if you want to kind of have chill chats about books. Thank you so much for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Lovely publishers over.